Lyra didn't know that the man standing outside her cell was the Alpha King. She didn't know that he had been searching for her for 3 years. And she certainly didn't know that the mass prisoner release happening throughout the dungeons that day was all orchestrated so he could reach her without causing a political catastrophe. The sound of cell doors clanging open echoed through the stone corridors like a symphony of freedom she would never hear. Lyra pressed herself against the far wall of her cell, watching through the iron bars as prisoner after prisoner walked past her door, free, every single one of them, free. "Marcus will pay for what he did," called out Jorik, the smuggler from the cell next to hers. He paused at her door, his weathered face creased with concern. "Why isn't yours opening, girl?" Lyra shook her head, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Administrative error, probably. They'll figure it out." But even as she said the words, something cold settled in her stomach. 3 years she had waited for justice. 3 years of insisting she hadn't stolen from the royal treasury, that her cousin Marcus had forged the documents and testimony. 3 years of being forgotten. The footsteps faded down the corridor until only silence remained. She sank onto the thin mattress that had been her bed, her refuge, her entire world for so long. The rough stone walls seemed to press closer, mocking her with their permanence. Everyone else was walking into sunlight while she remained buried in shadow. That was when she heard them. New footsteps, different from the shuffling, eager steps of released prisoners. These were measured, deliberate, commanding. The sound of boots that had never known doubt or hesitation. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as a figure appeared at her cell door. Tall, impossibly broad shoulders filling the narrow doorway, dressed in black leather that spoke of wealth and power. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on ancient coins, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the colour of storm clouds. But it was the way he looked at her that made her heart stutter. Not with the casual dismissal she was used to from guards, or the pitying glances from other prisoners. He looked at her like he had been searching the entire kingdom and had finally found what he sought. "You," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected, rougher around the edges, despite the obvious nobility in his bearing. "You're Lyra Blackthorne." It wasn't a question. Heat shot up her spine at the way he said her name, like he had tasted it before, rolled it around in his mouth during long, sleepless nights. Something in her chest pulled tight, a strange warmth spreading through her ribs that had nothing to do with the cold dungeon air. "I am," she whispered, then cleared her throat and tried again with more strength. "Though I can't imagine why that matters to you, my lord." A smile ghosted across his lips, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "It matters more than you know." He pulled a key from his belt, not the heavy, crude iron of the prison guards, but something silver that gleamed even in the dim torchlight. "Every prisoner walks free today." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as he slid the key into her lock. "Every prisoner except me, you mean? They've already gone." "No." The lock clicked open with a sound like destiny falling into place. "Every prisoner, including you." He pulled the door wide, and for the first time in 3 years, nothing stood between Lyra and freedom except her own fear. "You're coming with me." The words hit her like a physical blow. Not "you're free to go" or "your case has been reviewed." "You're coming with me." Spoken with such quiet authority that her body wanted to obey before her mind could catch up. "I don't understand." Lyra pressed herself harder against the wall, even as every instinct she had developed screamed at her to run toward the open door. "I've done nothing to earn your attention, my lord. I'm a convicted criminal." "Convicted," he agreed, stepping into her cell, like he belonged there, like the cramped space had been waiting for him all along. "But not criminal." The way he said it, with such absolute certainty, made her knees weak. "You don't know what I've done." "I know exactly what you've done." His storm-grey eyes held hers, unflinching, uncompromising. "And I know exactly what was done to you. Your cousin Marcus needed you gone to claim your family's land. He forged the Treasury documents. He bribed 3 witnesses to testify against you. He thought if you disappeared into the dungeons, no one would ever ask questions about the Blackthorn estate again. Lyra's vision blurred at the edges. 3 years of screaming her innocence to stone walls and deaf ears, and this stranger, this lord, spoke her truth like it was common knowledge. Who are you? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes, close enough that his presence seemed to fill every corner of her small world. When he spoke, his voice was soft enough that she had to lean forward to catch every word. I'm the man who's going to make sure you never see the inside of a cell again. I'm the man who's been waiting 3 years to set things right. His hand extended toward her, palm up, fingers steady, despite the tremor she felt building in her own chest. And right now, I'm the man asking you to trust me enough to walk out of here. The golden thread she had felt tugging at her ribs for months, the one she had convinced herself was madness born of isolation, pulled so hard she gasped. His eyes darkened at the sound, and she knew, somehow, impossibly, that he felt it too. I don't even know your name, she whispered. Darius. He stepped back, giving her space but keeping his hand outstretched like a lifeline. And you, Lyra Blackthorn, are coming with me. Not a request, not a suggestion. A promise wrapped in velvet and steel. Lyra stared at his hand for a long moment, this impossible choice between the safety of known misery and the terrifying possibility of unknown freedom. The cell had been horrible, but it had been hers. Predictable. This man, Darius, represented everything she didn't understand, couldn't control, couldn't trust. But when she looked up into those storm-grey eyes, she saw something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. And beneath that, something else that made her breath catch. Patience. He would wait. However long she needed, he would wait. Slowly, trembling, Lyra placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with infinite gentleness, and the warmth that spread up her arm was like coming home to a place she had never been. There, he murmured, and his thumb traced over her knuckles like she was something precious. That wasn't so hard, was it? Lyra couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The man holding her hand with such careful reverence was offering her everything she had lost. Justice, freedom, truth. She should have been suspicious, should have demanded explanations and guarantees. Instead, she let him lead her out of the cell that had been her world, toward a future she couldn't imagine, but suddenly, desperately wanted to discover. The days that followed were a strange blur of sensations Lyra had forgotten existed. Sunlight on her face, clean air that didn't taste of stone and despair, the gentle rocking motion of the finest carriage she had ever seen, with cushions softer than her prison mattress, and windows that showed her a world she had been locked away from for 3 endless years. But none of that compared to the man sitting across from her, watching her with those storm-grey eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Darius had given her clothes, a simple blue dress that felt like silk against skin, too long wrapped in rough prison cloth, and food that actually had flavour. Real bread, fresh fruit, water that didn't taste of rust and neglect. She ate carefully, afraid that too much too fast would make her sick, but more afraid that this was all some elaborate dream she would wake from, to find herself back in that cell. You keep looking at me like you expect me to disappear, Darius said quietly, his voice warm with something that might have been amusement. Lyra's cheeks burned. I keep expecting to wake up. This doesn't feel real. It's real. He leaned forward slightly, and that golden thread in her chest pulled so hard she had to press her hand against her ribs. You're real, and you're safe. Safe. The word was foreign in her mouth, foreign in her mind. She had spent 3 years learning that safety was an illusion, that the people who claimed to protect could be the ones who destroyed you. How do you know so much about my case, about Marcus and the forgeries? Something dark flickered across his face. Because I investigated it myself. You? Lyra stared at him. Why would you investigate the case of a nobody from the outer provinces? Because you're not a nobody. His voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the silk. And because I don't tolerate injustice in my lands. Your lands. The words hit her like cold water. Who are you? She whispered. Darius was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. You really don't know, do you? Lyra shook her head, suddenly afraid of the answer. I'm Darius Ashmore, he said simply, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The carriage seemed to tilt around her. Alpha King. She was sitting across from the Alpha King, like she belonged there, like she had any right to share space with the most powerful shifter in the known world, the man who could command armies with a word, whose mere presence could bring entire kingdoms to their knees. Her voice came out as a squeak. She cleared her throat and tried again. Your Majesty, I should be on the floor. You should be exactly where you are, Darius said firmly, and you should never bow to me again. I don't understand any of this. Lyra pressed her hands together in her lap to stop them from trembling. Why would the Alpha King care about one wrongfully imprisoned woman? What could you possibly want with me? The carriage hit a bump, and Darius's knee brushed against hers. The contact sent fire racing up her leg, and she saw his pupils dilate in response. Whatever this was between them, he felt it too. Your cousin needed you gone to claim your family's land, he said, his voice rougher now. But what he didn't know was that the Blackthorn estate sits on the border between my territory and the southern realms. Every land dispute there becomes my business. When I investigated the sudden change in ownership, I found the forgeries, the bribed witnesses, the trail of lies that led to your cell. You knew I was innocent and you left me there. The words came out sharper than she intended. 3 years of rage and despair bleeding through. Pain flickered across his face. I had to wait until I could protect you properly. Marcus has allies in the southern court. If I had simply freed you without evidence, without a plan, they would have killed you before you made it home. I needed time to build a case, to eliminate the threats, to ensure that when you walked free, you would stay free. Lyra stared at him, her mind reeling. You spent 3 years building a case for a stranger. Not a stranger. His voice was so soft she had to lean forward to hear him. Never a stranger. The golden thread pulled again, stronger this time, and Lyra gasped. Darius's eyes darkened to pewter, and his hands clenched on his knees like he was fighting not to reach for her. What is this? She whispered, pressing her hand to her chest, where the warmth seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. This feeling, this pull, he finished gently. Like something in your chest is trying to lead you somewhere you've never been, but somehow recognise? Lyra nodded, afraid to speak. That, Darius said, his eyes never leaving hers, is why I couldn't leave you in that cell, why I had to find a way to bring you home. Home. The word hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't had a home since Marcus destroyed her life, hadn't had a place where she belonged, where she was wanted, where she was safe. The carriage began to slow, and through the window Lyra caught her first glimpse of the castle that rose from the landscape like something out of a fairy tale. Towers that seemed to scrape the clouds, walls that glowed golden in the afternoon sun, gardens that stretched farther than she could see. I don't belong here, she breathed, overwhelmed by the sheer magnificence of it. Darius's hand covered hers, warm and steady and impossibly gentle for someone with so much power. You belong wherever I am. The certainty in his voice, the way he said it like it was simply fact, made her chest tight with emotions she didn't have names for. Hope, longing, terror. I'm a convicted criminal from the outer provinces, she said desperately. You're the Alpha King. This is impossible. The only impossible thing, Darius said, as the carriage rolled to a stop before the grandest entrance Lyra had ever seen, would be letting you go. He stepped out first, then turned to offer her his hand. Lyra stared at those long fingers, remembering how carefully they had touched her in the cell, how patiently he had waited for her to trust him enough to take that first step toward freedom. The golden thread pulled, and despite every logical reason she had to run, despite every fear screaming in her head that this was too good to be true, Lyra placed her hand in his and let him help her down from the carriage. The moment her feet touched the cobblestones of his courtyard, she felt something shift inside her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed, like coming home to a place she had never been. "Welcome home," Darius said softly, his thumb tracing over her knuckles in that gentle way that made her breath catch. Home. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand what that word meant. The weeks that followed were a strange rhythm of discovery and denial that left Lyra feeling like she was living someone else's life. Darius had given her rooms in the east wing of the castle, rooms with windows that overlooked gardens so beautiful they made her chest ache, with a bed large enough for 5 people, with a bathing chamber that had actual hot water flowing from golden taps. But none of that luxury could quiet the questions that kept her awake at night. Why her? Why had the most powerful man in the territories spent 3 years fighting for one wrongfully imprisoned woman? And why did every conversation with him feel like coming alive after years of merely surviving? She was avoiding those questions, and avoiding him when he found her in the library on the 7th night. "You've been hiding," Darius said quietly, his voice carrying that note of gentle amusement that never failed to make her pulse quicken. Lyra didn't look up from the book in her lap. Something about border treaties that she wasn't actually reading. "I've been exploring. This library is larger than my entire village was. Lyra." Her name on his lips was soft enough to make her look up despite herself. He stood in the doorway like he was afraid to come closer, like he was giving her the choice to run if she needed to. "We need to talk." The golden thread in her chest pulled so hard she had to press her hand against her ribs. "About what?" "About why you can't sleep, why you pace your rooms like a caged wolf, why you flinch every time I get too close." He stepped into the library, and she could see the careful control in every line of his body. "About why you feel the pull." The pull, heat flooded her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me." His voice was gentler than the words suggested. "Please, I can't bear it when you lie to me." Something in his tone made her book slide forgotten from her lap. "You feel it too." It wasn't a question. She could see the truth in the way his pupils dilated, in the way his hands clenched at his sides, like he was fighting not to reach for her. "I felt you the moment you were arrested," Darius said quietly, moving closer with the careful precision of a predator trying not to spook his prey. "It nearly drove me mad." Lyra's breath caught. "That's impossible." 3 years ago, I was in a council meeting when something slammed into my chest like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I excused myself and shifted, thinking I was having some kind of attack. His eyes never left hers. "My wolf led me straight to the Capitol prison, to your cell. I stood outside that building for hours, trying to understand why every instinct I had was screaming at me to tear the walls down with my bare hands." "You!" Lyra couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't process what he was telling her. "I investigated your case because I had to, because leaving you there felt like leaving part of my soul to rot." He was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes, could smell the pine and snow scent that seemed to cling to his skin. "Do you know what that pull is, Lyra? Do you understand what it means?" She shook her head, even though part of her, the part that had been raised on old stories and older magic, was beginning to suspect. "It's the mate bond," Darius said softly. "You're my mate, my other half, the person the moon goddess designed to complete my soul." The words hit her like ice water. Mate bond. She had heard whispers of such things in her village, stories told by grandmothers about wolves who found their perfect match, their destined partner, their one true love. "This is impossible," she whispered, pressing herself back against the library chair. "I'm a convicted criminal. You're royalty. I'm nobody. You're everything. This can't be real." Pain flickered across his face. "You think I care about any of that? About titles or bloodlines or what some court thinks is appropriate?" "You should care." Lyra shot to her feet, panic clawing up her throat. "Your mate is supposed to be someone worthy of you, someone who can stand beside you and rule kingdoms, not someone who spent 3 years in a dungeon for a crime she didn't commit." "You are worthy of me," Darius said fiercely, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You are the strongest person I've ever met. You survived 3 years of hell without breaking, without losing your capacity for kindness, without letting them turn you bitter and cruel. You are exactly who I was meant to find." "I'm scared," Lyra admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her chest. "I'm terrified of this, of you, of what you make me feel." Darius went very still. "What do I make you feel?" "Safe," she whispered. "For the first time in my life, truly safe. And that terrifies me more than anything, because I don't know what happens when you realize I'm not worth the trouble." "Lyra." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Look at me." She couldn't. If she looked at him, she would be lost. "Please." His hand lifted toward her face, hovering just shy of contact. "Let me show you." Slowly, trembling, Lyra raised her eyes to his. The moment their gazes met, the world tilted. The golden thread pulled so hard it felt like her soul was trying to leave her body to meet his, and she gasped at the intensity of it. "There," Darius breathed, his thumb finally making contact with her cheek. "Do you feel that? How everything else just disappears when we look at each other? How right this is?" Lyra leaned into his touch before she could stop herself, and the warmth that spread through her was like sunlight after 3 years of darkness. "Darius." "I know you're scared," he murmured, his other hand coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "I know this is fast and overwhelming and nothing like you planned for your life, but I need you to know something." "What?" "I lost my family when I was 22. Political assassination meant to destabilize the crown. My parents, my sister, my younger brother, all of them gone in one night." His voice was rough with old pain. "I never thought I would feel whole again, never thought I would find something worth protecting more than my duty to my people." Lyra's heart broke for him. "Darius, I'm sorry." "And then I found you," he continued, his forehead resting against hers. "Broken and brave and absolutely extraordinary, and for the first time in 15 years I felt complete." The kiss was inevitable, soft and careful and perfect, his lips moving against hers like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth, the taste of her breath. Lyra melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as 3 years of loneliness and fear dissolved under the gentle pressure of his mouth on hers. But reality crashed back too quickly. She pulled away, pressing her hand to her lips as panic flooded her system. I can't do this." "Lyra." "No." She backed toward the door, every instinct she had developed screaming at her to run. "This is too much. You're too much. I'm not ready for this." Darius didn't follow her, but the pain in his eyes was almost enough to stop her retreat. "Then I'll wait." "What?" "However long you need," he said quietly. "However long it takes for you to trust this, to trust me. I'll wait. I'll be right here when you're ready." Lyra stared at him, this impossible man who was offering her everything she had never dared to hope for. "What if I'm never ready?" "Then I'll wait forever," Darius said simply. "You're worth waiting for, Lyra Blackthorn. You're worth everything." The certainty in his voice, the way he said it like it was simply fact, broke something open in her chest. Without another word she turned and fled, the sound of his patient breathing following her down the corridor like a promise she wasn't sure she was brave enough to keep. The days that followed were a whirlwind of learning to breathe, in a world that felt too large, too bright, too full of possibilities she didn't know how to reach for. Lyra spent her mornings in the gardens, her afternoons in the library, and her evenings carefully avoiding the dining hall where Darius ate alone at a table meant for 20. She was reading by the window in her chambers when the commotion started in the courtyard below. Raised voices, the sound of horses and armed men. Something in her chest went cold, a familiar dread that tasted of prison cells and betrayal. Lyra pressed herself to the window and felt her world tilt sideways. Marcus stood in the courtyard with a dozen armed guards, his fair hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, his face wearing that same cruel smile that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. He looked older, harder, but still exactly like the cousin who had destroyed her life for gold and land. "I've come for my cousin," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "Under the Southern Realm's extradition laws, she belongs in our custody for proper trial." Proper trial. The words landed like a physical blow. Lyra's blood went cold as she understood what was happening. Marcus had found her, had found some legal loophole to drag her back to the Southern Realms, where his bribes still held weight, where his lies would be believed over any truth she might speak. Every instinct she had developed screamed at her to run, to pack nothing and flee through the servants' entrance before Marcus could see her, before he could finish what he had started 3 years ago. She could disappear into the crowds of the capital, find passage on a merchant ship, lose herself somewhere Marcus would never find her. She was halfway to the door when it opened. Darius stepped inside, and the sight of him, tall and powerful and radiating barely controlled fury, stopped her cold. His storm-grey eyes found hers immediately, and she saw something in them that made her knees weak. Rage. Pure, devastating rage, held in check by nothing but his iron will. "He can't have you," Darius said quietly, and his voice was rough enough to make her shiver. "He has legal papers," Lyra whispered. "I heard him talking about extradition laws." "Legal papers can be challenged." Darius crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "But that's not what this is about, is it? You're thinking of running." Lyra couldn't meet his eyes. "I won't be your weakness. I won't be the thing Marcus uses to hurt you. Look at me." His voice was steel, wrapped in silk. When she didn't obey immediately, he cupped her face in his hands, tilting her chin up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "You are not my weakness, Lyra. You are my strength. Marcus will destroy you if you fight for me. He'll tell everyone you're harbouring a criminal, that you've let personal feelings compromise your judgment." "Let him try." The words came out like a growl, and for a moment Lyra caught a glimpse of the wolf that lived beneath his human skin. Dangerous, powerful, absolutely lethal when protecting what was his. "Do you really think I care what Marcus Blackthorne thinks, what anyone thinks?" "You should care," Lyra said desperately. "You're the Alpha King. You can't risk your crown for me. Watch me." Darius's thumbs traced over her cheekbones with infinite gentleness that contrasted sharply with the fury in his voice. "I've spent 3 years making sure you would be safe when I brought you home. I'm not about to hand you over to the bastard who destroyed your life." The golden thread pulled, and Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt like choice, like trust, like the terrifying possibility that she was worth fighting for. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. "I'm going to remind Marcus Blackthorne exactly who he's dealing with." Darius leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "And you're going to trust me." Before Lyra could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the sound of voices rising in the courtyard below. She pressed herself back to the window in time to see Darius stride into the courtyard like he owned it, which of course he did. Even from 3 stories up, she could see the way Marcus's guards shifted nervously at the sight of him, could see the way her cousin's confident smile faltered as Darius approached. "Marcus Blackthorne," Darius said, and his voice carried easily through the afternoon air. "You have some nerve coming to my home and demanding anything." "Your Majesty." Marcus executed a bow that managed to be both respectful and mocking. "I've come for my cousin. She's wanted for crimes against the southern realms." "Crimes that were fabricated by you," Darius replied calmly. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate? That I wouldn't discover your forgeries, your bribes, your pathetic attempt to steal what wasn't yours?" Marcus's face went red. "You have no proof of that." "Don't I?" Darius smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Lyra had ever seen on his face. "Would you like me to read the confessions, the bank records, the testimony from the witnesses you bribed who were so eager to tell the truth once they realized lying to the crown carried a death sentence?" "She's a criminal," Marcus snarled, dropping all pretense of respect. "A common thief who belongs in chains." "She's an innocent woman who suffered 3 years for your greed." Darius's voice dropped to something soft and deadly. "But more than that, she's under my protection now." "Your protection?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Since when does the Alpha King concern himself with the fate of provincial criminals?" "Since the moment she became mine." The words rang across the courtyard like a declaration of war. "Lyra Blackthorne is my chosen mate. She is your future queen. And if you ever threaten her again, I will consider it an act of war against the Northern Territories." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Marcus went white. "That's impossible. She's nobody. She's nothing. She's everything." Darius's voice was quiet now, but it carried clearly in the shocked silence. "She's worth more than your entire miserable existence, and she is under the protection of the crown." Lyra's knees gave out. She sank to the window seat, pressing her hands to her mouth as the full impact of what had just happened hit her. He had claimed her publicly, in front of witnesses, in front of Marcus and his guards and anyone else who might be listening. She was no longer just a freed prisoner. She was the Alpha King's chosen mate, protected by the crown, safe from Marcus and his schemes and anyone else who might try to hurt her. "You can't be serious," Marcus was saying below, his voice high with disbelief. "She's a convicted criminal." "She's my queen," Darius said simply, "and you are no longer welcome in my territory. I suggest you leave before I forget my manners." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then at the guards who had suddenly found other places to look. The threat in Darius's voice was unmistakable, and even from the window Lyra could see the moment her cousin realized he was outmatched. "This isn't over," Marcus said finally, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Darius said softly, "it is." Lyra watched Marcus and his guards retreat, watched them mount their horses and ride away like the cowards they were. And then she watched Darius stand alone in the courtyard, his shoulders set with tension, his hands clenched at his sides. He had fought for her, publicly claimed her, chosen her over political convenience and social expectations. The golden thread in her chest pulled so hard it felt like her soul was trying to leave her body to reach him. For the first time in 3 years, Lyra understood what it meant to be chosen, what it meant to be protected, what it meant to be wanted, and for the first time since he had pulled her from that cell, she wanted to choose him back. Lyra found him in his study an hour after Marcus had retreated, his head in his hands as he sat behind a desk covered with official documents and correspondence that would no doubt deal with the political ramifications of what he had just done. The sight of him, this powerful man who had just claimed her before witnesses, looking suddenly vulnerable in the golden evening light, made her chest tight with emotions she was only beginning to understand. "Did you mean it?" The words came out softer than she had intended, barely more than a whisper in the quiet room. Darius looked up, and the relief that flooded his face when he saw her was so intense it took her breath away. "Lyra, I thought you might have—" He stopped himself, shook his head. Which part? All of it. Lyra stepped into the study, closing the door behind her with hands that trembled only slightly. About me being your chosen mate. About me being your queen. Did you mean any of it? Or was it just something you said to make Marcus go away? Darius was on his feet and across the room before she could blink, stopping just close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his storm-grey eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I have never meant anything more in my life. The certainty in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare and absolutely essential to his existence, made her knees weak. I don't know how to be a queen. You don't have to know yet. His hands lifted toward her face, then stopped, hovering just shy of contact, as if he was waiting for permission. All you have to know is whether you want to try. Lyra stared up at him, this impossible man who had turned his entire world upside down for her, who had claimed her publicly, despite every reason he had to choose someone more appropriate, more worthy, more suited to stand beside a king. The golden thread in her chest pulled so hard it was difficult to breathe. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." The confession was quiet, honest, tinged with a vulnerability that made something crack open inside her chest. "I'm terrified that I'm not good enough for you, that I can't give you the life you deserve, that I'll fail to protect you the way I failed to protect my family. Darius." "I love you," he said, and the words fell between them like stones thrown into still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she understood about her life. "I know it's too soon, I know this is all happening too fast, but I need you to know I love your courage and your kindness and the way you survived 3 years of hell without letting it break you. I love the way you see the world, the way you make me want to be better than I am. I love you, Lyra, and if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how precious you are." The kiss was inevitable. This time, Lyra was the one who moved first, rising on her toes to press her lips to his, pouring 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into the connection between them. Darius made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his arms coming around her like he would never let her go. This kiss was different from the tentative touch in the library. This was claiming and surrender all at once, the taste of forever on both their tongues. Lyra melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as the golden thread pulled so hard she felt like her soul was trying to merge with his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lyra pressed her forehead against his and whispered the words that felt like jumping off a cliff. "I love you too." Darius went very still. Lyra, "I love you," she said again, stronger this time. "I love the way you waited for me, the way you fought for me, the way you look at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken. I love you, and I want—" She took a shaking breath. "I want to try. To be your queen, to be your mate, to be yours." The sound Darius made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness, his thumbs tracing over her cheekbones like he was memorizing every detail. "Are you sure? Because once we do this, once we complete the bond, there's no going back. You'll be mine and I'll be yours for as long as we both live." I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And it was true. Standing there in his arms, looking into his eyes, Lyra felt the last of her walls crumble. "I choose you, Darius Ashmore. I choose this. I choose us." The bond snapping into place felt like coming home and catching fire at the same time. Lyra gasped as warmth flooded every cell in her body, as something fundamental shifted inside her chest, as the golden thread that had been pulling at her for weeks finally connected them completely. She could feel him, his emotions, his love, his absolute devotion flowing through the bond like liquid sunlight, could feel the way her acceptance healed something broken inside him, the way her choice made him whole in a way he hadn't been since he lost his family. "Mine," Darius whispered against her lips, and the word was reverent, grateful, triumphant all at once. "Yours," Lyra agreed, and meant it more than she had ever meant anything. And you're mine. Always. His arms tightened around her, and Lyra felt safe in a way she never had before. Not just protected, but cherished. Not just wanted, but loved. Forever, if you'll have me. They stood there in the golden evening light, wrapped in each other's arms and the warm glow of a bond that felt like destiny finally fulfilled. For the first time in her life, Lyra understood what home meant. Not a place, but a person. Not safety from the world, but safety within it. "Will you marry me?" Darius asked softly, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. Properly this time, not just a political claim to protect you from Marcus, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Lyra's laugh was bright with tears she didn't bother to hide. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises about the future they would build together. And when he slipped his family's ring, an ancient band of silver and sapphires that had belonged to queens for generations, onto her finger, Lyra felt the last piece of her broken heart slide back into place. She was no longer the forgotten prisoner in cell block 7. She was no longer the woman too afraid to trust, too damaged to love, too broken to heal. She was Lyra Blackthorne, chosen mate of the Alpha King, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Lyra stood on the balcony of her private chambers, watching the sunrise paint the gardens in shades of gold and rose, and marvelled at how completely her life had transformed. The woman who had once counted days by the scrape of metal meal trays against stone floors now marked time by the gentle rhythm of a kingdom that had become her home. She wore the crown of the Northern Territories like she had been born to it, though some mornings she still caught herself touching the delicate circlet of silver and sapphires to make sure it was real. The coronation had been a spectacle that drew nobles from every corner of the known world, all of them eager to see the woman who had captured the heart of the most powerful shifter alive. But it was the memory of Darius's face when she had walked down that aisle, the way his eyes had lit up like she was every answer to every prayer he had never dared to speak, that she treasured most. "Good morning, my queen." Warm arms slipped around her waist from behind, and Lyra smiled as she leaned back against Darius's chest. Even after all these months, the simple pleasure of being held, of being safe, of being loved, felt like a miracle she would never take for granted. "Good morning, my king." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to straighten the collar of his shirt. "You're up early." "I had reports to review before the council meeting. 3 more wrongfully imprisoned people were brought to my attention." His expression darkened slightly. Apparently Marcus wasn't the only one using bribery and false testimony to remove inconvenient relatives. Lyra's heart ached for those unknown prisoners, for the fear and despair they must be feeling. It had become her mission, her purpose beyond being queen, to ensure that no one else suffered what she had endured. "I want to visit them today." "I know you do." Darius's smile was soft, proud, tinged with the deep love that never failed to make her breath catch. "That's why I've already arranged for the carriage to be ready after breakfast. We'll review their cases together." Even now, months later, the casual certainty of that word, the way he included her in every decision, every plan, every aspect of ruling, made something warm unfurl in her chest. She wasn't just his queen in name. She was his partner in truth, his equal in all the ways that mattered. "What would I do without you?" Lyra asked, rising on her toes to press a soft kiss to his lips. "You'll never have to find out," Darius murmured against her mouth. "I told you I would wait forever, remember? I didn't mention that I also planned to love you forever." The kiss that followed was sweet and familiar, and still made her toes curl with its perfect rightness. When they finally broke apart, Lyra caught sight of something glinting on the small table beside the breakfast that had been laid out for them, a letter sealed with the royal crest. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the correspondence. Darius's grin was answer enough before he even spoke. Official confirmation from the southern realms. Marcus's lands have been officially seized and distributed among the families he displaced. He's been stripped of his title and exiled to the outer provinces with nothing but the clothes on his back. Justice, sweet, perfect justice for every lie he had told, every life he had destroyed, every night she had spent in that cold cell believing she was forgotten. Lyra felt the last tiny knot of fear in her chest finally loosen. Good, she said simply, and meant it. What about his co-conspirators? Also dealt with. The judges he bribed have been removed from office, the witnesses he paid have been charged with perjury, and the officials who turned a blind eye to his corruption have been stripped of their positions. Darius's eyes were fierce with satisfaction. No one who had a hand in putting you in that cell will ever have the power to hurt anyone else again. Lyra leaned against him, overwhelmed by the thoroughness of it, by the way he had made sure that justice was complete and absolute. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that we're real. Believe it. His arms tightened around her, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. You saved me too, you know. I was half a king before you, going through the motions, doing my duty, but never really living. You made me whole. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over their kingdom, over their home. The gardens below were beginning to stir with activity, servants tending to the roses Lyra had requested, guards changing shifts, early-rising courtiers taking their morning walks. I have something to tell you, Lyra said quietly, her hand coming to rest over her still flat stomach. Darius went very still. Oh? Dr. Marion confirmed it yesterday while you were in your meeting with the trade ministers. Lyra looked up at him, unable to keep the smile from her face. We're going to have a baby. The sound Darius made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his face bright with the kind of joy that made her chest tight with love for him. A baby? Really? Really? Lyra laughed as he set her down, his hands immediately moving to cradle her face like she was made of the most precious glass. Are you happy? Happy? Darius shook his head, wonder clear in his voice. Lyra, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A mate, a queen, a love I never thought I deserved, and now a family. I'm not just happy, I'm complete. The kiss was different this time, reverent and grateful and full of promises about the future they were creating together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Darius rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered, both of you. We love you too, Lyra replied, and felt their child, their miracle, flutter in response to the warmth of the bond that connected them all. Later that morning, they would visit the prisoners and work to set right more wrongs. Later that week, they would announce the pregnancy to a kingdom that would celebrate the news of their future heir. Later that year, they would hold their first child and marvel at the perfect blend of their features, their love made manifest. But right now, they simply stood together on the balcony of their home, watching the sunrise over a kingdom where justice had been restored, where love had triumphed, where a woman who had once believed herself worthless had become everything. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing that could ever happen. Sometimes losing everything means finding yourself. Sometimes the darkest cell in the deepest dungeon is just the last stop before coming home. Lyra Ashmore, Queen of the Northern Territories, mate to the Alpha King and the most loved woman in 7 kingdoms, smiled as she watched the sun climb higher into a sky that held nothing but promise. From prisoner to queen to everything she never knew she needed, from lost to found to home. The golden thread that had once pulled at her chest now wrapped around her heart like the warmest embrace, connecting her to the man she loved, the child she carried, and the future that stretched ahead of them like an endless summer day. She was exactly where she belonged.